You.
I am well, thank you.
Great. Nice to see you.
You need to sit on this side of the camera.
I do.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
have a
gonna be
nice
on camera?
drive.
I can't
Live and
just
on
hide?
air.
Oh, shoot. I'm coming.
I was thinking if I leave this big purple glass.
Try to build a wall of computers
Now
around.
everybody will know what kind of pop I do. I'll be right back.
Oh no, ours are on. Zoom.
Join us in.
I just did. I'm hosting, I think. What? No, we're not doing that right now. See, it says Trent's talking, but it's really us.
Okay.
I don't know. And it's recording. No, it doesn't need to restart. It did restart. Check, check. Let's start about anything.
Oh, look, it's Ray.
Hey, cool.
Continuously for the meetings.
Okay. You're having those during the
January.
17th?
It's like, it's to pick the dates.
Oh, good, good. Okay. I don't have to wait.
No.
Check, check.
Hello.
Hello, Red.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Living the dream.
Atta girl.
Hi, Mariette.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello,
Who else is on there?
this is Martha. Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Hi,
Cool.
Martha.
Hi, I'm driving well, I'm going to be driving now. So if we get disconnected, I'll pull over and call back.
Okay.
Be careful. So you're using a hands-free device.
Yes, it's a hands-free device for sure. They shut the heat off once the kids leave, and then the building gets kind of cold. So I don't want to stay later because I'm too cold.
Fair enough.
All excited
Iris.
about this, and
Yes.
Alan, I never was clear if he was coming.
So while we're waiting, I'll tell you I'm going to have knee surgery on January 8th.
Oh, I think that's a good thing, though, for
I
you.
think dealing with this since the end of September, I think it's a very good thing.
It's up to you to give Alan and
Iris.
Iris a little more time, or sort of. Iris is just in Albany. I thought she might actually come.
Yeah, maybe she's hit some traffic. Well, maybe I'll go ahead and get us started just because I do want to make sure that we can be respectful of the time that we've all set aside to be here. So welcome, everybody. The agenda, first piece is the general rulemaking process. We need to go through that. What are we doing with that?
It's pretty straightforward.
All right, help us out.
But for those of you who don't remember me from the November meeting, I'm Tom Roush, and I'm the new rules coordinator and budget coordinator for TSPC. And I just thought I would add these steps that we went over during that time, just to make sure that it was clear, because I know even internally we were a little unsure of where the rules fell when they would go to the licensure committee versus when they would go to RAC and vice versa. So I thought it might be helpful just to kind of look at the steps just to give, this is the general process. Occasionally, in fact, even right now, we have a rule that is not going through this exact step process. But generally, this is what we're talking about when we have at least one committee meeting, a licensure committee meeting, or other committee for the TSPC before the public comment period and before the Rules Advisory Committee gets there. You know, I know I've talked with Tony and we've talked about it in the commission that really the commission is the policy making body. And so it needs to look at the rules and be the ones to generate the rulemaking process. And as representatives of that program specification, you guys are the ones that would do that. So you'd have at least a couple times, well, at least once, but hopefully more than that, to look at the drafts and talk about the drafts before there was rulemaking. And then step two, we would talk to the Rules Advisory Committee about these rules. So that's where other stakeholders get their input, and that's just input on the draft. It's not actually policy making as such. And then once we get their input, we file the final notice of rulemaking and send the notices out to legislators and interested parties, etc. Then there's a public comment period, usually about anywhere from 15 to 30 days is the law. So it could be longer than that, but that's what it normally is. Then we update the draft based on the comments, and then we bring it back to the committee. So you guys can look at it and review it and say, yes, we're ready to propose this go to the full commission for adoption or comments, however you decide. Then the commission, full commission, would look at it, and we're trying to get those sessions down. We would like that to be twice a year rather than every single time we meet. So that's why we're looking at a February and November date for commissions to review, full commission to review the rules. Obviously, you guys will have all the input that you should, because you're the ones who are the experts on those areas. And then if the commission approves, then we file the permanent rule. So it's a little maybe more drawn out process than it has been in the past, but it's also designed to make sure that the commission gets plenty of input before we do any kind of proposal to the public. Okay.
Any questions from any of the other commissioners?
No, not for me.
Great. Silence. All right, so we'll move on forward.
Sounds great.
Yes. And so just so you guys can kind of get a sense, I know that these virtual meetings are sometimes kind of funny. The three of us are here, Elizabeth and Erica, and our wonderful person who just described rules. Remind me your name again. I'm so sorry, Tom.
Yep.
Thank you. My dad's name, I should remember that. And then Iris, is Alan on as well?
There I see Alan.
Iris, Alan,
Woohoo.
Rayette, and Trent are all virtually. So if you have, if you want to add anything to the discussion, please do. We can hear everybody. Just make sure you unmute yourself when you want to speak and mute yourself when you're not speaking. Okay?
And we're actually Trent.
Yeah. We're
So
Trent. Oh, that's us. So Trent
Yeah.
is not, I'm like, that's
Yeah.
weird because he was just right
Yeah.
there. Okay. All right, good. So we're Trent. All right. So the first thing, and for today, one of my primary goals is to really clean up this agenda a little bit. There's a lot of things on the agenda that have been on here for a long time. And we just need to make the decision, is this something we're going to try to work on and find an answer to, or is this something we need to let go of and say we're not going to take any action? So this is kind of a cleanup meeting so that we can hand a clean agenda to our next chair of this commission, okay? So the first real item on here is kind of a sticky wicket, and it's been on for a long time. And I should also say this is a public meeting and it's being recorded. So the first kind of sticky wicket item, I would say, is the music and PE work groups. And this has been going on for a really long time. I was kind of getting a little history lesson from Elizabeth before this meeting, just so I could understand all of the context. And it seems as though we have a couple questions to ask.
If anyone sounds confused with a little blue Congress shoe that goes through the kid, please bring it to the
I'm not sorry. I couldn't hear that. Could you repeat?
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. What that was, this is Alan Bruner calling. What that was an announcement here. I'm at my face-to-face school right now, so that was kind of a wrap up at the end of the day. Sorry.
That's all right. Hi, Alan.
We are working professionals.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for making the time to join us. So I don't know if folks have enough information from this agenda to kind of figure out what we need to do next. I know I had some confusion. Do any of the other commissioners have any questions about what the purpose of those work groups were, or what the commission was asked to do?
I guess just maybe a recap, because this is my first meeting, so I'm not really sure where. I knew that these were happening. I know what I know, but I don't know what else has been decided and talked about in the last however long.
Right, and that's kind of the exact same boat I was in. So.
Okay, great. So I haven't really missed much.
Yes, no, I think we're in the same place. So Elizabeth,
Great.
is it okay if I kind of give what I think I understand, and then you will not hurt my feelings at all when you correct me, because this is new for me and I'm just trying to understand all of the details. So saying it out loud will help me understand. Sure.
So wait, this is Martha, and I
Yeah.
got knocked out of the meeting for a few minutes. So just tell me what you're talking about right now.
We're talking about the music and PE work groups.
Okay, thank you.
I'm kind of just doing a little bit of a recap because they've been kind of circling on the agenda for a while.
Yes.
So back in October of 2018, there were some work groups with some music and PE educators. And one of the questions that was brought forward was, is it possible for a licensed elementary teacher to add the endorsement of PE or health just for the elementary level? And if so, should that be a simpler process than a K-12 endorsement that you could add to any license, any level license? So that was one question. I'm not exactly sure why the work groups came to be. I think there was some worry around with the change in the number of PE minutes that we were going to have to add a number of PE teachers. And so there was a question about that. What did I miss?
And thank you, Chair Bear. So I'll add just a little bit to that. So when we first started discussing this issue, it was really when highly qualified was still in effect. So even earlier than October of 2018, when I first got here in 2014, districts were clamoring about this, and especially under the PE area because of the requirement in statute for them to provide minutes of PE instruction to kids that were provided by a PE licensed teacher.
Right.
Yeah, that was really the impetus. And then when we had heard from a few other districts, especially rural districts, that they couldn't find music teachers. So music got in there, and then art is the third one that back in the old basic and standard licensure days, people could add those endorsements by just a test. Then under initial and continuing, they no longer could do that because it was determined that these areas needed a program. They're performance-based in a way, so it wasn't something that anybody could just take a test. The teaching methods are different by comparison to sometimes in a regular classroom. Alan, you're way more qualified to talk about some of that than I am for sure. But in the history of it, so we started talking about the music, and the word got out to the Music Educator Association, which it should have. And in this room one day, we had about 25 music educators from all levels, the university, all the way through the music supervisor for the Salem-Keizer School District came. I mean, pretty much OMEA's board showed up here. And we had a very robust discussion about how it really isn't possible that somebody with just an elementary multiple subjects endorsement and that program completion should ever be allowed to teach music even to kindergartners. So that's where that started with the music. The PE people didn't show up until a year or two later. And then again, we filled the room when we started to talk about the idea of just allowing it to be added by test. So that's always an interesting thing. And the programs, and Rayette, Danny was here for a couple of those meetings, and he probably has some really good insight. He was willing to help existing teachers who wanted to add PE, and I think you have had a few come through your program. But music still seems to be the one that causes more concern even. They're finding some PE. Eric has got one right now, but it sounds like maybe it's an onerous program. I know that PSU, I believe it's a practicum and a pedagogy course and the test to add PE. I don't think they're doing the same thing for music.
So these are all 3 program required.
Yes.
So that's where, did you just say PSU?
Yes.
They've got to be doing more than that, because we just got an email saying that what we're doing is probably not going to suffice either. And we're actually using existing coursework that teacher candidates have taken previously, and then admitting them into our MAT programs. So I'm going to come from an EPP standpoint on this, and then I'm going to come from a couple different standpoints. It is really hard to get teacher candidates through in these programs because they are long, and because we make them take the entire program before they even come to us. They've got years in some cases where some of these individuals who are working in, I'm going to talk rural and in restricted license areas, who have experience because they took some courses, are now taking more courses or have professional backgrounds and are coming in, and they have to take at minimum what we are proved to be at least a minor or a major within those 3 fields, and then they go through the program. It is very difficult for individuals to go through this, and because of that, and because they have to do all this work, we lose some.
I'm wondering what your thinking is about is there a difference, or should there be a difference between someone who has a K-12 endorsement in those 3 areas versus an elementary teacher teaching up through 5th grade or 6th grade self-contained?
So I like the idea of the methods. I think that's really important because how we teach high school students is different than what we teach with elementary students. So I think the 2 methods courses are very different, and I think that should be considered. I think there should also be a consideration for classroom management, 2 different pieces in most cases, unless a university is offering them as a K-12 classroom management piece. But again, it has to do with that program piece, and all that comes with experience in the type of classes. So here's an example. For an art teacher, you have to take so many, drawing classes. You have to take so many ceramics classes, so many painting classes, photography, these different pieces. And there's an arbitrary number that each university has kind of said, this is the minimum that you have to take. So that's where I would almost like to see a little bit more decision-making that we have, that kind of when we're talking about multiple subjects where we've said you have to have different courses in each of these areas, that might be almost more important than saying you have to have this entire program. You just have to have courses in each of these, or a certain number of courses or credits across these boards. That's what I would almost advocate for, because then you're getting someone who's well-rounded in a variety of program, or in a variety of different artistic means. I'm just talking art. This could be the same thing for PE and music. But that way we're specific on what we're looking for at minimum. And again, this is for somebody who's coming back in most cases to add this endorsement on. So it's a little bit different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess my question, I'm thinking about an elementary, let's take elementary music for a minute. So elementary music, the skill set that you would need to teach elementary music is really very different, because at the middle and secondary level, if I understand correctly, kind of taking my high school principal hat, you had to be able to teach choir, orchestra, band, or really any kind of musical course. Whereas at the elementary level, it's really just vocal with some instrumental pieces and reading music and those parts. Am I understanding that part correctly?
Yes, I would agree with that. I would also say in some of our larger districts though, or even in our rural, we're going to be very limited on, we're not going to offer band, orchestra, and choir. We may just offer band or
Right.
choir. So, or an after school club in
Right.
some cases.
But the endorsement required would be the same.
Yes.
So right, so they require the same amount of training regardless of what's being offered.
Mhm.
So I'm just comparing like what happens in my elementary school around music with what happened at the high school that I worked at around music, and thinking that those were very different skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're having a real shortage of teachers, I'm wondering if having a pathway for elementary specific that is maybe not quite so intensive, because the amount of skill that they would need to just teach vocals, not that that's not just like that's not important, but it's a different skill set than all of the instrumental
Right.
pieces. If that shouldn't be something we could consider if we're still experiencing a shortage in that area. Alan, you have some history on the commission. Do you have any idea what's been discussed in the past with that?
Actually, I will be honest, I do not, because this is my first opportunity to be involved here actively. I was on this committee last year, but I was not able to make any of the sessions.
Okay.
I will tell you, as someone who added a music endorsement to my sciences, I am intrigued with this because I was choir director at a small school for 18 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, OEMA never breathed down my neck. And I do know my Phrygian from my Dorian. And the thing that's interesting about doing that is I had a choice between science and music a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So maybe I'm a mutt when it comes to that. But I'm just wondering if there's any tracking data the TSPC has in terms of those people who have been pursuing a licensure to allow them to do exactly what you're talking about. Because I can appreciate why there would be the discussion, but I can also appreciate why it would be a select venue of districts. And for small and rural, I guess the question is, do you wind up getting some local church choir director to come in and volunteer? I mean, you know, do we have any data on that?
We don't. We have to get that from ODE because we don't
Gotcha.
maintain employment data. So that gets really tough for us to get.
Sure.
Well, and I guess I would also wonder, is there still a shortage? Are districts still having a hard time finding music and PE teachers in the same way that they did previously? I don't think there are many elementary schools still hiring art teachers that are just art teachers.
Right.
Hey, we have just an art teacher.
Do you really? What a gift.
We have no music. We have a full-time art teacher.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, this is Iris. I have a music background and went through the music program at OSU. But in our school district, you know, it's really about what the school wants. And then they say how much FTE goes to music. And sometimes, yeah, they split it between technology and they split it between art. So I don't know of very many schools who have a full-time music teacher because they split them between even schools.
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know if there is a shortage, but that would probably be key information to obtain.
And my concern with the shortage, I'm going to talk rural, is once you have somebody who can do that, they're going to try to multitask that one person in as many ways as possible.
Right.
Oh, I know that. That is a true statement.
Yeah. So I wonder so the real question with this particular agenda item is, are we comfortable with where it sits, or do we want to continue to investigate if we want to do something differently? So I don't know if there is still a shortage in those areas. Elizabeth, do you have any sense of whether or not districts are struggling to fill those positions?
I don't hear about it as much as I did 2 or 3 years ago, but I don't have any hard data.
Okay.
You know.
What do the other commissioners feel? Is this something we need to continue to pursue, or are we comfortable leaving it kind of status quo?
So currently, this is Martha. Currently, it's K-12, correct?
Correct.
Which personally, I totally disagree with. I don't have the skill sets to teach high school. So I disagreed when we went over to that. But, so I would think to switch it, but then I think we should switch all the licenses over that way.
Okay. Iris, what are your thoughts?
I feel like, I mean, I have enough music friends. This is my husband's a musician. He teaches at OSU for music. I think that we can, if we get some specific questions that I can go back and ask my music friends about this particular, agenda item, I feel like it would be, I would feel comfortable doing that, just so that we have more information that we can make an informed decision.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, to be honest with you, because this is also my first meeting, I don't know exactly what your questions are to go to my friends and say, hey, let's just have an informal meeting about X, Y, and Z. And
I think the real question is, do we want to differentiate between adding an endorsement in these areas, music, art, and PE, or maybe just one, or maybe all three? Differentiate between adding it to an elementary license versus a secondary license.
Oh, well, my 2 cents about this is that having done a music program myself and my husband, it is rigorous as opposed to PE and art. I'm not saying that those aren't skilled, but this is like a new level. Like there's the amount of student teaching that you do, and anyhow, it's more than this regular teaching. So I would say that I think it is a separate endorsement.
Do you think it should be separate for elementary versus secondary, or do you think the same endorsement works K-12?
Right now I would say I think you could keep it K-12, just because you still need all the theory. And when they do, this is the tough part, because when a principal or the committee does their interviewing process, they don't know anything about music. I mean, really, you have to go on. They're just, I don't want to say they're just gambling, but they kind of are, because principals don't know enough about music, generally speaking. It really is a specialized area. So it really comes to word of mouth of how they did on their, who they did their teaching. What do you call that? Their teaching.
The practicum.
Yes, their practicum. Who they did their practicum with, and how well they did, and if they're going to get a recommendation. I mean, if you're in Salem Kaiser and you did your student teaching with Mrs. Boderman at South Salem, I mean, you're going to get a nice job, because now she's the head of the department at Salem Kaiser Music. But I mean, so I think it's okay to right now to stay with the K-12, and I can go and find some more information out from people in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is Alan,
Yeah.
and I would argue that, yeah, it makes sense, because the fact is that, for small and rural, you are the music department.
Right. So you're
you are going to be in the elementary school as my music educator is. You are going to be in the middle school. You are going to be in the high school. You will be floating all over the place. And that's the way our music person is doing the instrumental, and he is now doing choir, because when I retired kind of halfway, they schedule choir during the morning rather than the afternoon. And so he took over what I had been doing for 18 or so years, and is doing a fine job. But he enjoyed me doing choir, because that means that freed him up that period, and he was being used by the district in a total K-12 capacity.
Okay. Rayette, do you have anything to add?
I'm not sure yet. I just kind of, I worry about those who already have something and now we're making them go back and then take. So I'm an elementary teacher and now I want to go do music because my district is hiring me, and now I have to go do an entire music program. I worry about that. I think that's going to be the hard sell. So if I could hold on to something, I would like to look at the different type of courses we would want these individuals to have, rather than an entire program.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, it sounds like, I mean, I guess I feel like what I'm hearing is for the most part, there wouldn't be a substantial change. We might want to look at some ways to streamline through examining previous coursework and skills that folks are coming in with, but we wouldn't not necessarily want to differentiate between an elementary versus a secondary endorsement. Am I?
Yes.
Wish I could see faces.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay. All right, I think we're gonna go with that because I'd like us to kind of try and move this somewhere. Okay, is everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
Awesome,
Yeah.
okay. Library media is another one that, just for some quick context, there was a concern because the last program in the state sunsetted for adding a library or having a library media program, so we no longer have one in the state. There are some out of state that folks can access that are virtual, and I know some folks who have done that. The reason that I understand from is that there just wasn't the demand for that particular endorsement, which does not surprise me because it's not required that you have someone with a library media license running your library media. And so many districts do that differently. So this feels more like an informational item. I don't know that there's anything to do with it. Is there anything else, Elizabeth?
I don't think so.
Okay. Does anyone have any concerns about that?
Well, does Oregon have reciprocity then for those few districts that may actually still have someone who is library specialized? Do we have the ability to provide an Oregon credential using reciprocity? Is that what we currently do?
We do, Alan.
Okay.
If I may.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
We do. So what they have to look at is that program in the other state approved by the state to add the endorsement? And as long as they check that track, then they're okay.
Okay. So would we wind up in a situation like we had, last year or so with somebody coming in from Hawaii that had a program that ultimately turned out was not approved, and yet they had been licensed in the state, and that put us in a really interesting situation, if you guys remember that.
Yes, I do.
I mean, it wasn't pretty.
No, that there were, well, we saw the license, and it was actually a Washington license in that situation. And we saw that, and we had been told if they have a license in another state, then they should be licensed here.
Right.
And
Right.
until that individual wanted to add an endorsement, I had to dig a little further to find out if he needed a practicum to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's when I went, now wait a minute, I don't see student teaching here anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if we were to apply that same type of standard to someone with a library media endorsement, if it would be such that, we have enough of the content background to say, yes, we approve this program from the state of Washington or California or wherever.
Well, we would never say that we approve a program in another state. That's
Okay.
up to the other state. And as
Okay.
long as that program, it remains accredited there, then they're okay here.
Okay.
So another question around this is there's a question around folks who have media science degrees, right? So they didn't go through a teaching program. They, studied to become media library specialists and work in the public libraries, and wanting to add their teaching license to that. That's a question, I suppose, is are there any programs would those folks then, Elizabeth, have to access would they go through the same process with an out-of-state program, or would that look different for them?
They could, but now I remember that we did a waiver for one a year ago.
Okay.
Somebody came with, although she had many, many years ago completed an elementary multiple subjects program, never was licensed, got her master's in library science, worked in a public library most of her career, and now is here. And the district hired her as the librarian. So we ended up, we waived the elementary. I'd have to look at the actual waiver to remember exactly how we handled that. But I think a waiver request is actually maybe a really good way to go.
For something like that.
Because that was one in 5.5 years.
Right.
There aren't a whole lot of people.
Right. I mean, I guess the real question around this is this even something that we should have? Because districts are not requiring it for the most part anymore. I think it's something that is really nice when they're hiring someone, if they can find someone with that endorsement, but because it's not required, I don't know how much demand there is, which is why we no longer have any programs in the state.
You know, this is Martha. It was my understanding that Portland requires that you have that endorsement in order to become the library, the official librarian.
Sure.
And there was a problem finding people a couple of years ago when I just switched over to that.
Right. Well, and right now in Medford, where I work, we have someone who had a library media endorsement, and she's going through the full I'm actually her supervisor for her student teaching. So she's going through an entire teaching program in order to be licensed, but she started with a media science or library science degree. Maybe she did not know applying for a waiver was an option. So, you know, there are certainly places who still value that skill set for sure. And I think when I hired a media specialist at the high school, I did require that they have it or get it. And that person, I'm not there anymore, but she's pursuing, she's having to add that to her teaching license through an out-of-state program. So, not sure.
I worry about taking it away if districts are still needing that. That's my fear. So as much as we're doing waivers and things, I think we still need to consider, especially for this, using the library science individual. The example is here to have a methods course. If we could somehow figure out, and like, we have somebody who needs that, they have this degree, we understand a practicum experience would be very important where they have supervision. We know a methods course would probably be very important as well. We don't have any programs within the state, but if we could come up with some sort of opportunity for those who do need it, where an EPP could put in like some sort of a waiver and this person's gonna participate like in an English language course or something, so they get some sort of methods and then they have to do a practicum, I would feel much more comfortable with that rather than saying we just don't have anything and there's no options within the state.
I think that would be amazing. What it would take to make that happen would be an EPP willing to do that.
I think we could bring that up at OACTE and see if there's EPPs that would be interested in doing that. But I think understanding that there would be a waiver, and so we don't have to have someone that has this degree so much versus the English language arts person could offer this course to them. I'm just picking our English language arts because I think that's personally the best match. I could be very wrong, but I think those methods could kind of be applied to a library media specialist and done that. So I think we could bring that up at OACTE, and I would be willing to take that forward.
And put that on your to-do list. Thank you.
All right.
That would be
Got
awesome.
it.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Because I think that it would be nice to be able to say we have some options, because I don't, there are districts who are still requiring it, and so I don't feel comfortable saying there's just no way to do it, and yet there, at a certain point we'll no longer have an avenue. So that would be great.
Because it's almost 20 to 5 and Tom has to leave, I might suggest we roll to number 10.
Okay, so we're going to jump around on the agenda so Tom has an opportunity to talk through number 10 with us. I am going to try and get us out of here by 5, but we're running late. So go ahead, Tom, number 10.
Sure, thank you. So there's 4 things that we've identified as possible rule areas to look at, and I'm not going to go into detail in them at all, but just to give you a sort of more or less a heads up of things we can work on tomorrow, next year. So, which is almost tomorrow. One is to begin the personnel services redesign, so that would be looking at school counselors and such to really update and modernize the rules that are around their licensure. There's also at least there's been requests to consider a rule to allow licensees under LCAs to teach a lesson but not a full course of instructions. And that would be something to consider. Again, not that we're pushing anything. There was a bill, a couple bills actually, Senate Bill 688 and House Bill 3030, that required all boards, not just TSPC, to look to grant temporary authorization of licensure for military spouses. We already have rules governing that, but of course, the bills that went through differentiated from what we have in rules. So our council has said, hey, look, here are the places that you differ, and you should probably take a look at those and you know, get them harmonized. So that's on our plate too. And then finally, there's some professional development redesign, professional development licensure redesign that we need to look at. And I guess we're sort of in the drafting mode internally on that right now, but that will be, I think, at least we plan to have that come forward next year. So this is really just a heads up, not anything for you to be wrestling over, but if any of those particularly interest you, please, you know, get in touch with me or Elizabeth and give us your input. If there's something that are burning questions that you've had or burning needs that you've had regarding those areas, this is the time to address them.
So the idea is you would bring us drafts around these pieces, and
Right.
then we'd be going through them at one of our committee meetings.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. Any questions for Tom? Okay.
All
That was
right.
my wait time. Are you impressed? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, the special education work group update. This is another piece that has kind of been sitting here for a long time. I went to a meeting with ODE in November of last year, so a little over a year ago, where this was a topic of conversation. It sounds like where it is right now, Dr. Aziz is really working with ODE, and this has become kind of an ODE piece that they're trying to figure out. I don't know that there's anything for the commission at this point to do. Am I missing anything with that, Elizabeth? Okay, so are there any questions from commissioners about that particular agenda item? Again, wait time. I'm closing that one. Okay.
Cool.
So Barry's work group update. I think let's see. The last update there was from the OSPA Fall Regional Meeting. Elizabeth, do you want to talk about that?
The districts don't, I mean, I do a newsletter every once in a while, and I got the word out after the July meeting about the multiple measures, and they seem to have kind of missed that, and programs, because it's so new, programs haven't been real, I don't know what the right word is. They haven't told people about it too much. That's what I mean to say. And but as we direct some people, we're seeing requests for emergency and restricted licenses as we direct people back to say, hey, did you ask your program if they could do a multiple measures assessment? And that seems to be getting things moving a little bit that way. And that's a huge, huge help. So, Rayette, I know you've done a couple, one for Morrow County that was extremely wonderful to make people just, it's helping them know that they're going to get through somehow. And that's great. So
it sounds like we're needing to do some work around spreading the word. Is that what I'm hearing?
yeah, I think Tony has now just this fall done a presentation at OACTE. Is that correct? I think yeah.
What? So 30 seconds. What did I had to go grab my phone from somebody's office. I apologize.
Oh.
Sorry. Really sorry.
No, it's okay.
Talking about getting the word out about multiple measures and helping the programs know to use it. I think Tony talked at a recent OACTE meeting in depth about it.
And if I think he did, we talked about it, but there's a new one, and I do know he is speaking at the next OACTE meeting, so I can make sure with him that that's something he's going to chime in about.
Okay, good. Just getting the word out that this is a thing that we should really be looking at more and more and more for these candidates that are struggling with testing.
Yes.
I think this has been a huge accomplishment to move that forward. And of course, we'll always be working to reduce barriers, but in terms of an active piece, I think making sure that we're sharing what we've done and we are open to new things coming forward is kind of where we're at with that particular agenda item.
And I'll just add that just today, Tony talked to me a little bit about the work of the Educator Advancement Council, and that they're going to work more on other barriers as well. In the work group that Tony held, what some of those candidates told us is that, yeah, the test is a barrier, but it's not the only one. All the cultural issues, whether it's a cultural issue that happens while they're in the program or their first day in the school building, where they look different than everybody else, or they're just not. It was fascinating for me I was really happy to be a part of that. So there will be continued discussion about barriers, probably not in the context of the licensure committee.
Okay.
So
great. All right, career and technical education. So the most recent update around this, I think I would predict that there's going to be a significant amount of hiring in this area moving forward as we continue to expand our CT opportunities for our high school students through the recent funding through the state, which is super exciting. I think there's a concern around CTE licensure is a very interesting pathway, and it does, there's been a concern raised that once you become licensed as a CTE teacher, you are a licensed teacher. And so it does allow you to teach lots of other things as well. And so some folks have expressed some concern about that. There's also a concern just in terms of finding people who are qualified to come in and do this work. So I think you've got some kind of competing concerns. Just when I was working in the high school, I had I was in stiff competition with the other high schools in the area to make sure I had enough, and I had other high schools in the area to make sure that we had, qualified folks, particularly in our computer science areas, business, and some of those CTE pathways. So I guess there are more concerns. I'm not sure if others have been worrying about what opens up once you come through a CTE doorway to licensure. Can you talk, Elizabeth, give them like the 30-second what it takes to get a license through a CTE pathway?
So if you have not completed a teacher preparation program, you first go to the regional coordinator. Hopefully the district has identified the program of study. There are a few instances where somebody wants to become a CTE teacher without having the support of a district, but most of them go through it with district support. They convene what's called an instructor appraisal committee that looks at the individual's work experience, career history, all kinds of things, and determines whether or not that work experience is appropriate for the program of study that the district is proposing. And then after all that's done, that's when they apply for the license. We do the background check. We get the information from ODE about what endorsements they're qualified for. And then they are granted a restricted license generally, and they're on that for 3 years. And they get on as part of ODE and the instructor appraisal committee assessment. They're given a professional development plan. They're not all the same. If they're new, completely new to education, then there's some pretty robust requirements. The commission approved in January of 2016, approved Clackamas Community College to provide a teacher preparation program, so to speak, specifically for these CTE teachers. I know that's where they get a lot of these courses. And so then at the end of the 3 years, hopefully they become a fully licensed CTE teacher. The rub comes with the course to endorsement catalog, where somehow schools are hung up a little bit on what graduation requirements. So they're teaching math in the context of construction. There's a course code, it's called, it just escaped me. Not business math or anything like that, applied mathematics.
Applied technical math.
Applied technical math. And so that's what high schools want. They want to assign that CTE teacher to grant credit for that course so it meets graduation requirements. And one of the things I'm talking about with ODE right now for next school year is removing those applied math, applied English, especially those two from the realm of a CTE only licensed person. That might help a little bit. And I don't know enough about graduation requirements to say, can that the math they do in that construction class count?
So the requirement for mathematics around graduation is you have to have at least 3 years of math at the algebra level or above. And there is applied technical math. One can certainly argue that it's at the algebra level and above. I would argue that you need to be a math teacher to teach that course effectively. Actually, especially if you really want it to be at algebra or above, there's actually 2 levels of that course, and it's offered at many community colleges as well. So it's usually you can usually get dual credit for it if the instructor goes through that process with the local community college. But certainly they would need a math endorsement to teach it, that was my assumption. I happen to have a CTE teacher who had a math endorsement, but that was a different animal.
Right now, the CTE teacher can teach the applied math or the applied English.
Oh,
yeah.
What do others think about that? Am I the only one who's surprised?
I'm not surprised, but I know that from an OCTM perspective, they're pretty jealous of their space.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Taught by.
You know, they have to go through Common Core, and it's like, yeah, actually, if there's good cooperation between a math content specialist and a CTE content specialist, it can work, and the model is really, really effective.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee that any one particular POS is going to wind up using a co-teaching model or wind up granting credit on anybody else's endorsement area. So.
Right.
We, a couple of evaluators and I toured the local career and technical high school, in November. And we talked to them, we asked them this question, and for them here in Salem-Keizer, they have a fully licensed math teacher working, and it, as you say, co-teaching with that construction technology teacher.
Yep.
And that's a brilliant model.
Right.
I think
it is.
I think it would be, I think it is important that someone has the mathematical expertise around, in particular, the standards that they have to teach at being algebra and above, because there's a lot of application in that course, but there's also a lot of mathematics. And so I would want to make sure that you would be at least working with the math teacher. That would be my recommendation. That's the thing. Any other thoughts? I think the concern that folks were most worried about is that it does open the doorway for folks to teach things. And so my caution would be, we want to make sure if someone takes this pathway I want this pathway to be available because it's critical in getting qualified people in front of our kids to teach these important skills. I want to make sure that's what they're teaching once they go through that process. Is there anything anyone else would want to chime in on with this particular topic?
This is Martha. I too feel that if you're going this route, it's what you can teach should be restricted to what you have the expertise in. And if you haven't gone through a teacher preparation program, then you shouldn't be teaching other subjects.
Okay. I would concur.
I will, I'll continue my work with ODE, and I think we do need to leave this on the agenda.
Mhm.
It will cause concern if it's dropped off without any explanation. So I think we have a meeting scheduled.
We had talked about the
January.
need to schedule one in January.
Yeah, I'm my meeting with ODE
Oh, okay,
though,
with
on this
ODE,
topic,
okay.
so yeah, it seems like they scheduled it.
And I think I don't want to make it more challenging for districts to, because it is so important to find folks who can fill these roles. And it's also hard in rural areas when it's like you've got one section of something. And so trying to make a job for them. So, I'm open, but I would want to make sure that we're being cautious. Okay, who wants to talk about teacher leader licensure approval process?
Martha?
So go ahead.
I have major concerns with the way we're evaluating the applications now. And it really feels, just like it said in the agenda, that you can get your teacher leader license by doing things that you do anyway. So that to me, I went back and read the state statute, and it's my understanding that you're showing leadership in various venues, not just in your school, but in your team level, your school level, your district level, the state level. There's different levels that you should be showing leadership qualities in, and not just what you're doing in your school.
I agree. I also, there are items in that rubric that are literally written into the teacher job description around participation in PLCs and reviewing data. And so I kind of have two concerns. The first is, are we asking the right questions? Is the rubric that we're using appropriate? And it could be, I think, if right now, as I understand it, they can get, 7 items in one strand and 6 items in another strand and none in any of the other strands. Is that correct? Like you need 12, but there's no requirement about them being spread out over the strands. Correct. So that might be a way to solve it, to kind of get to Martha's point that it's not sufficient to kind of be a grade level team leader, which is something that's really important, but not necessarily something that would identify you as having a teacher leader license. My feeling would be we need to review that and take off those pieces that are, what we expect from any teacher. Particularly the ones that gave me the most pause were the ones around PLCs. Did others have other areas that they felt like were not necessarily in the leadership vein?
Well, this is Martha again. It's that I really believe you need to go beyond the school level in order to be really a teacher leader. Mm-hmm. You have to have your hand in different things that you're working with. Maybe not as chair of something, but you're participating at other levels beyond the school level.
So participation in district level work in some way, committees.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, this is obviously more than we can solve in 3 minutes, but I'm wondering if, Elizabeth, what would be our next steps if we wanted to take a look at that rubric?
I wonder if the review committee should meet the people with the most experience looking at the applications and make a recommendation back to this group.
Okay, and the review committee is?
You, Martha, Bruce, and Jessica Clausen.
Okay, so Martha, does that sound like a good next step for that group to meet and then bring back a recommendation?
Yes.
Okay, and if that could be our only agenda item, then we might be able to do something with it. Okay, and we're doing good. We have 2 minutes left. The last thing, I think it is important, just because there was so much kind of hanging on here, that we do have another meeting in January. At that point, I will be so happy to hand the chairing responsibilities over to Rayette. But I do think having a second meeting before our next full commission meeting, so that we actually have something to report, will be useful for the commission. So look
I
for
agree.
a doodle poll.
When in January are you talking about meeting?
I think what likely will happen is Rayette will work with Elizabeth on identifying some possible dates, and those will come out to us via doodle poll and or spreadsheet or whatever it is, and then we'll identify a time that works for the most of us. But I would imagine likely the second half of the month.
Probably no later than the 24th of January to get on the commission agenda. I need a week for the agenda item.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Right,
5th
February.
and 6th, the 6th
Yeah.
and 7th.
So perhaps the week of the 13th or the week of the 20th.
20th.
Okay, I'm having knee surgery on the 8th. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Well, you
but
can
I can
be-
participate on the phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Under the
That'll work.
influence of anesthesia, like painkillers.
Make it more fun for all of us. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate your time. And I think with that, we will sign off unless there's a final word from anybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care,
Thank you.
everybody. Happy
Take care.
holidays.
Thanks, everybody.
Uh-huh. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Put that 1 hour on the nose.
There's an
That's
MC.
impressive.
Wow.